tree close to Pikes Peak. They've done core drilling samples on it. So this is all verified, scientific, whatever. Do you know how old the oldest living tree in Colorado Springs is, or in Colorado is? 100 years old? 15? It is over 2,000 years old, around 2,050 years, the oldest living tree in Colorado. That's back when Jesus walked the earth, right? This tree was here on this earth when Jesus was here. So, we got a 500-year time difference. We got a big tree when Abram comes through. We got a big tree here that Joshua is at. And we know we're at Shechem, same site. What else do we know about Shechem? We know this is the very plot of land that Jacob bought for himself as he passed through the promised land. And he doesn't get to stay in the promised land either, just like Abram. He's a sojourner. He's a passing through kind of a thing. But he passes through as well, and this is the exact same spot that he buys. And they don't have tons of land here, right? We know about a well that Abraham buys, and then Isaac has to rebuy it. We know about a cave that Abraham buys to bury their dead in. And we know about this. They don't have tons of land here. They're just passing through, and it's been promised. It's all yours. But this is Jacob's spot. This is his land. It goes back to Genesis chapter 33. He buys the field. The tree is mentioned again. Big oak tree is mentioned again in Genesis 33. We know he even digs himself a well to water this field, this little plot of land, so they can feed their livestock and such. But even more significant than the fact that this is Jacob's plot of land that he owns, there's a crucial moment in Jacob's life. Genesis chapter 35, where Jacob is settled at Shechem on his little plot. And God says, we're going to go, taking you to a different spot, to Bethel, and you're going to go and you're going to build an altar for me there, and you're going to move and transition there to Bethel. That's what God tells him in Genesis chapter 35. So what does Jacob do? This is the moment where God is going to change his name from Jacob to Israel. This is a big moment. And Jacob, we get the sense he knows something is up here. So Jacob gathers everybody in his entire household, all his family, all the people who are with them, and he says these words to them: "Put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments, and let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I have gone." So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. This very spot. Abram, Jacob, and Jacob has this sort of moment with his family, not unlike the very words, it's not word for word or anything like that, but we all know these famous words from our passage here of Joshua: "Choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me, we will serve the Lord," right? We're not serving those foreign gods anymore. Jacob has the exact same moment. And they take all the foreign gods they've got and they bury them under an oak tree. Maybe the exact same tree. This very spot. So it's entirely appropriate then, at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses doesn't get to go into the promised land, but what does Moses say? One of the last things he charges Joshua with, he says, when you get across and when you get to the promised land, I want you to go to one spot. He doesn't even say the word Shechem. But Shechem, if you're not familiar with the geography, if you don't remember all this stuff from when Eric preached on it a little bit ago here, Shechem is this narrow, small, little valley between two big mountains on either side, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And it's Commentators, I haven't seen it, I haven't been there, but all the commentators say this is one of the most beautiful spots in this whole entire region and area. You've got mountains, this narrow valley passing through. The feet of the mountains come to within like 500 yards of each other. So it's not a huge, massive plot of land. And Moses tells them in Deuteronomy 27, I want you to go to that spot. And I want half of you to line up at Mount Ebal. And you guys, unfortunately, got the raw end of the deal. You get to be the curses side of the equation. And I want half of you to line up on the side of Mount Gerizim. And we're going to walk through and carry the ark of the Lord through. And we're going to read to you guys every word of the law and the covenant and all the curses and all the blessings. That's one of Moses' last things he charges Joshua with. And we did that. That is back in Joshua chapter 8. After they have defeated Jericho, after Achan, after they finally defeat Ai, what do? Joshua chapter 8, verse 30. Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, has commanded the sons of Israel, as it's written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones. That's exactly like almost word for word right out of Deuteronomy. Verse 33, all Israel with their elders and officers and judges were standing on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, the stranger as well as the native. Half of them stood in front of Mount Gerizim and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, just as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had given command at first to bless the people of Israel. Then afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse. According to all that is written in the book of the law, there was not a word of all that Moses had commanded, which Joshua did not read before all the assembly. And if you go back to Deuteronomy 27, which Eric took us when we were here, they even wrote the words out of the law on the stones. Shechem, same spot. They've already been here before. After God wins them these victories in the promised land, they line up and they read the blessings and the curses together. And here we are again, exact same spot, Shechem, where Joshua calls them all together. And they're thinking, this is on this ground Abraham stood. Maybe by this very tree. And God said those words to him, to your descendants, I'm going to give this land. And Jacob stood in this very spot and had this moment with his own family. Give me all these false gods, because as for me and my family, we're done with them. We're burying them under the tree. And they're thinking, we ourselves have already been here. We've already done this once. And now here's Joshua at the end of his life saying, we got a hold of the covenant. We got a hold of the covenant. And so that's what he calls them to, and that's the backdrop for our entry point here for this whole speech that he gives them. Joshua moves into preacher mode. So this is kind of second section of our sermon tonight. The first one's just the setting, right? But the second one, we're going right back again to kind of where we were last week. If you weren't here with us last week, we talked about the logic of faith. In Joshua 23, Joshua intersperses it all the way through. He keeps coming back to, again, look back. Let's remember what God has done so that we can have strength and faith to go forward today. And instead of weaving it through, he just goes there in this huge chunk, right? All the way through verses 1 through 13. He gets on preacher mode and he gets going. So let's hit some of the high points here. Verse 2, Joshua said to all the people, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, from ancient times your fathers lived beyond the river, namely Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, and they served other gods. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river, and led him through all the land of Canaan, and multiplied his descendants, and gave him Isaac. First and foremost, the number one point, and this frames the whole entire speech. You guys used to serve false gods. Back beyond the river, that's who your fathers worshipped. And they're thinking, yeah, that's true. But here's the point. It wasn't their doing that they left that. It wasn't even their doing that they gave up those false gods. It's all God's doing, right? If God doesn't show up, if God doesn't call Abraham by name, Abram, and say, come, follow me, I'm taking you to a different land, a land that I'm going to give you, they're still back there. They're still worshiping those other gods, idols and things. And yet God, in his grace, from day one, the very reason they exist is because God grabs them and God pulls them out of that scenario and says, come, I'll show you another land and I'm going to give you that land. Follow me. It's all grace. And it frames the whole thing. That's who you used to be. You used to be people who worship those false gods. But I've called you out of that. And he goes on. There's some surprising things here in this sermon, speech, whatever you call it. We even got to it a little bit there. Then I took your father Abram from the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. Interesting. I multiplied his descendants. Gave him Isaac. And then we go from there to, well, we do get a little slow multiplication, maybe. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. And we know for even Isaac, the wait for Isaac was like 20-some years, right? God's timing is interesting in all of this. But I multiplied your descendants. I gave you Isaac. He did get Ishmael on his own, right? But then we get Jacob and Esau. We go on. This is interesting all the way around. To Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it, but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. They don't get the promised land either. Where do they end up? They end up as slaves for hundreds of years. Down again, not in the promised land that I have said I will give you. They land somewhere else in slavery. And then we get on to the next one. We're going to hit a couple different sections here. You've got the Egypt section, you've got the beyond the Jordan section, and then you've got when we cross the Jordan section, kind of three different areas here. And Joshua's just walking them through. This is the mighty acts of God. This is what he's done for you all. So in Egypt, we get Moses, we get Aaron, we get the plagues. Even just the how this all plays out is interesting to me. I brought your fathers out of Egypt and you came to the sea. When you go back and read the account, it's almost like God leads them into a trap. They get out, and where do we go? Let's go right there by the sea. And they're all going, what in the world? Because they can hear Pharaoh's army coming, this superpower. They're getting out their horses and their chariots and their army, and Pharaoh's at the head of it all. There's something here with God's timing. There's something here with God kind of almost just leading them almost to the edge of defeat every single time. And then right there, right when they're almost about to go off that precipice, which I might do someday because I like to walk around when I preach, right as they're there on the very edge, God does something amazing. And the angel of the Lord and the cloud of his glory moves from in front of them to behind them and separates them from Pharaoh's army. And God says, what are you doing, Moses? Get going with this people. And he holds out his arms and the staff, and the Red Sea parts, and they go through. And he says this statement in verse 7 of all this stuff, and your own eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Some of you here today, Israel, Joshua says, you saw that with your own eyes. Maybe some of you who are elders now, these leaders who he's been referring to, were young kids. And they walked through on dry land. And Pharaoh's army comes and follows. And the seas come crashing down. And again, the message is, God did that. And then we get to beyond the Jordan. There's Sihon, there's Og, these two kings. They're coming through. That's their message. We're just passing through your land. They send out scouts, right? We just want to pass through. We won't even touch your wells, drink any of your water. We're just hitting the highway and we're moving through. And these kings, these nations come after them. And God delivers them into their hands. You get this whole Balaam character. This one's funny because this is not one of the biggies that I go to, right, with Israel's history. The Exodus and all this stuff. And here he brings in Balak and Balaam. Do you remember this? So Balak is the king of Moab. They've now settled in the plains of Moab. They're just on the other side of the Jordan, getting ready to go in. But because they've defeated Sihon, because they've defeated Og, these two great kings and their armies, the fear of the Lord is on this people. And Balak says, I need help. And he goes and recruits this guy, Balaam, this diviner, right? And he says, I need you to come curse this people. And he utters these interesting words. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. Sounds an awful lot like the role we know God actually plays, not Balaam plays in this, right? But they go, and he begs Balaam multiple times, I'll give you all the silver I've got, just come and curse this people because they're numerous and we're scared of them. Eventually, Balaam consents. And we get the whole episode with the donkey, right? You remember this? So Balaam gets on his donkey, and he starts headed to where he's going to meet Balak. And this, as you think about it, friends, this might be cooler than Jericho. This might even be cooler than the parting of the Red Sea, right? Because here's Balaam on his trusty donkey, and the donkey keeps giving him problems on the journey, right? First off, the donkey takes him off into a field, and he's like, what are you doing? Get me, I'm going this way. And the donkey's pulling him that way. And the second time, they get back on the path, and the donkey sees something up ahead. Obviously, that's why it went off the first time. But the donkey again sees the angel of the Lord in the path, and the donkey is like banging him up against the wall, trying to fit through and get past the angel of the Lord. And finally, the angel of the Lord comes around again and camps right in the path, and there's nowhere for the donkey to go. What does the donkey do? He just lays down as if he's dead. And Balaam is like, what in the world? And he's beating his donkey, and this is crazy. This is why I said this might be cooler than even some of these other things, right? What does God do? God opens the mouth of the donkey, and the donkey turns around and is like, hey, what's going on, man? Why are you coming after me here? That's New International Dan's summary, I guess, right? It's not quite those words, but the donkey's like, hey, man, I have always been your trusty steed. Why you beating up on me? And God opens Balaam's eyes. The same way he opens the donkey's mouth, and Balaam sees the angel of the Lord. He's like, oh man, I'm dead. I'm dead. And he eventually does some repenting, yet he continues on the journey anyway. We think maybe he had his own plans for the way this was supposed to go. Maybe I'm going to get rich here, but he continues on. But now he's for sure made up his mind. I ain't saying anything that God himself doesn't tell me to say. And he gets up there 3 different times, and Balak gets the whole thing going. We build altars, and we're sacrificing animals. Just look at a little tiny piece of Israel and just curse them over there, that little piece. And all that comes out of his mouth is blessing after blessing after blessing. That it was impossible for him to curse them. He had to bless you, Joshua says, and I delivered you from his hand. Crazy stuff. God delivers again And God delivers again, and God delivers again. In comparison to the talking donkey, I mean, the rest of the story is almost bland and banal, right? Then I took you across, and then we destroyed Jericho, and then I gave all these other nations into your hands, and on, right? I mean, who cares? Talking donkey, good grief. God does all this stuff. The Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. The Lord says, gave them into your hand. It wasn't your bow. It wasn't your sword. I did it. That's what Joshua told the leaders, again, last week in chapter 23. The reason you guys, one of you could put 1,000 to flight was not because of you. It was because of only one thing, because the Lord fought for you. That's what Joshua is saying again here. It wasn't you guys. The Lord fought. The Lord did this. And so it calls for a response. Verse 14, now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. So because of what God has done, logic of faith calls for a response now. Put away those things. Serve him. So lastly then, the covenant renewal piece. The big chunk here in our section. This covenant is bigger than Moses. It's bigger than Joshua. It's for the whole nation. It's in response to who God is and what he's done. And so again, we get this famous call, right? Choose this day whom you will serve. But it's interesting. This is not the speech you would expect from Joshua, right? And he didn't, last one, chapter 23, we kind of skipped over some of those interesting parts, but we're going to hit them again here tonight. Neither one of these speeches would go according to the nice script we would pick, right? I mean, I'm thinking like motivational speaker, you can do it, right? Or I'm thinking, go in, it's going to be great, and on and on, like all this stuff. This is just what I think of from our culture today, right? I'm picturing like the late night TV motivational guy, and I don't really watch TV late at night because there's nothing on, and we don't have TV anyway. But from years ago, I have that in my head, you know, the guy who's selling Ginsu knives at 12:30, and it's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and go, you can do it, this is the greatest thing ever. This is not that speech. And in chapter 23, that ain't that speech either. This is not what we expect. And first off, he's telling them, put those things away, serve the Lord, verse 14. If it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served when they were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. He's like giving them options here. Hey, do you want the old gods from beyond the river, or do you want the Amorite gods? And they're going, what? You just recounted all this amazing stuff that God has done. Why on earth would we go back that direction? They answered, far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. That's their response. He's laying out other options for them, and they're like, no way, man. Far be it from us. We're going to serve the Lord. And then you get in verse 19, just when you thought we're kind of back on the sane trail of this whole gathering, it gets crazy again. Joshua says, you won't be able to serve the Lord, for he's a holy God. He's a jealous God. He will not forgive your transgression or your sins. If you forsake the Lord and serve other gods, then he will turn and do you harm and consume you after he has done good to you. Whoa. Feeling really strongly motivated right now, Joshua. Let's do this thing, right? He flips it all on its head again. And they still go on. No. Verse 21, they say, but we will serve the Lord. And Joshua says, you're witnesses against each other. And they all say, okay, we're witnesses. Joshua says, now therefore put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And the people said, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. So Joshua makes the covenant with them that day. He made for them statutes and ordinances in Shechem, and Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God. So he writes it down. He took up a large stone. This is Joshua's lot in life, it seems, right? Way back at the very beginning of the book, what's Joshua doing? We're lugging large stones around so we can make this big pile to remember when we walked across the Jordan. Here he is, he's an old guy. What is he doing? Hey, we need to get another large stone, and we're setting up another memorial thing here, right? This is, what in the world? He says, you guys are witnesses against yourself. We're setting up the stone. We're setting it up here under the oak. It was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Joshua says, behold, this stone shall be a witness against you. For it has heard, the stone has heard, all the words of the Lord, which he spoke to us. And Joshua sends them on their way and dismisses them. We end on funerals here with our passage, but I want to go back, though. What just happened? And if you're thinking that from 24, we should go back to 23 too, right? Because that's some of those verses I said we're just not going to get to. Chapter 23, another interesting speech. Now it came about, verse 1, after many days when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their enemies on every side, and Joshua was old, but the first key word in all of 23 is rest. We've defeated all our enemies. God's given us all this land. We've got finally rest. But here's the crazy tension, that there's no more rest the rest of the passage. All we get is tension. We depart from rest and we get to verse 6. Be very firm then to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right or to the left, so that you will not associate with these nations which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you are to cling to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. For the Lord has driven out great and strong nations from before you, and as for you, no man has stood before you this day. One of your men puts to flight 1,000, for the Lord your God is he who fights for you, just as he promised. So take diligent heed to yourselves, to love the Lord your God. Here's where it gets fun. He's saying, don't go to the left, to the right. Don't get off the path at all. Cling as hard as you can. For if you ever go back and instead cling to something different, cling to the rest of these nations which remain among you and intermarry with them so that you associate with them and they with you, know with certainty the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out from before you, but they will be a snare and a trap to you and a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes. Ouch! This is what's coming your way. Snares, traps, whips to your sides, thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good land which the Lord your God has given you. Ouch. There's a scene in one of my favorite movies. It's a Disney Pixar, so I think it's okay to mention. It's Ratatouille. You familiar with that at all? The rat who likes to cook and wants to be a chef or whatever. But the rat can't do it on his own because he's a rat in like a 4-star restaurant, so he needs a dummy human. So you get the curly red-haired guy, and the rat's like making him cook and do all this stuff. But eventually they have a fight, and the rat leaves the guy. Are you tracking? And now the guy is left trying to run this amazing restaurant himself, and they know, I probably lost at least half of you already, right? Yeah. Larry's shaking his head at me like, what are you talking about? But there's the main bad guy in the movie is this food critic who takes delight in pleasure in destroying restaurants and destroying their reputation and criticizing every single thing they do. And so is Remy's the rat, right? Yeah. What's the guy's name? I forget. Linguini, thank you. Linguini, the chef, the red-haired curly guy, he knows the critic is coming and he knows it's time. So what's he doing? He's got all his staff together in the kitchen and he's giving them this horrible, awful speech about how the critic was here last time and that took 1 star away. And then the next time it probably killed his dad, Gusteau, and all this stuff. He's going on and on trying to give them this motivational speech and it's horrible. And one of the cooks turns to the other guy and he's like, this is very bad juju, man, right now. This speech that's happening. That's all I can picture in these moments. They're looking at each other and they're listening to all these words that Joshua's saying and they're like, this is some really bad juju right now. We're in trouble. What's going on? What's it all about? Maybe even bigger. Who is this God? Who is this God they're covenanting themselves with, and what is going on? The theme of the entire end of the book of Joshua is hang to the covenant. Don't let go. It's here in 23, it's here in 24, Joshua's last 2 speeches. It's there with the crazy altar in 22, right? The ones who live beyond the river, what do? Is they head home, they've been dismissed, and good job, thanks for staying with us. They build this crazy altar, and they all gather. Covenant faithfulness. Are we going to stick to the covenant or not? And it's good that they don't go in swords blazing first. They talk, right? We hit that, but the whole meat of the issue is if they're doing something that goes against the covenant, we got to take them out. It's there in the land divisions, all those chapters right before, right? Because the word is, you guys haven't even gone in and taken the land you're supposed to yet, and you've still got people. And you've got to get rid of them. And if you don't get rid of them, you're going to intermarry, and it's just going to be problems. So the word to every one of these tribes is, hold to the covenant. You got to do this. There's a tension here. There's a tension in the entire book. There's a tension in the entire Old Testament as we see this covenant play itself out in the lives of this people and this nation. And Joshua, like Moses before him, knows exactly where this is headed. He knows exactly what's coming. This isn't going to go well. Moses, for all the things we think of Moses, this great man, this mediator, and he sees the Lord, right? The Lord's glory passes by in front of him. He spends all this time with the Lord, so his face is glowing and the people are scared. Moses, this great, great man, again, one of the underrated things about Moses is he's a songwriter. And we get to the end of Deuteronomy, and he writes this song and says to the people of Israel, memorize these words. That's in Deuteronomy 32. It's the worst song ever. Don't go memorize those words. Because Moses knows where this is headed. And Joshua was there that day. And he knows where it's headed. This isn't headed for happily ever after. Who is this God? What's he up to? What's he's doing? He's the same God of all these mighty deliverances that Joshua has just recounted with him, the talking donkey and all. It's all God's mighty deeds, but he's also the God who's holy and just, who, as we've seen throughout this letter, tells the Israelites, go in and spare nobody. Take them all out. Judge them. We're waiting for all of this until the wickedness of the Amorite is complete, and God uses them to come in and judge this awful people we see in Leviticus 18. They're horrendous deeds, and God uses the Israelites to judge them, and then God turns around and says, and I'm going to judge you. These promises, they turn the threat direction, right? We see that again in the end of 23, verse 15. It shall come about that just as all the good works which the Lord your God spoke to you have come upon you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the threats. It's a dual-edged sword. God is going to keep his promises here. On the one hand, it's glorious, but on the other hand, until he has destroyed you from off of this good land which the Lord has given you. That's the warning. That's what's coming. And first off, we just again have to say, we don't get to pick and choose. We don't get to make God into the image that we want. We take him from his word. We take it at fault. That's what we bank on. And in this covenant, that this is the shape of this relationship, and this is what's here. This is what he's doing, I think. Two things. One, he's teaching them, he's teaching us, he's teaching all the world. And we've said this, at least I've preached this one other time through here. You can't do this. Number one thing, he's teaching them, you can't do this. The faithful Israelite, Joshua among them, Moses among them, even the lesson for them is you can't keep this covenant. We know from the New Testament, how is any of them saved? Abraham is saved not by the covenant, not by his obedience. Abraham, Romans 4, is saved by what? One little word. Faith. So for the faithful Jew, the faithful Israelite, the message is you can't do this. You can't keep this. And so the cry of their hearts is, Lord, as they look ahead to Christ and wait to see what God will do. The cry of their hearts is, Lord, where is your promise? Where is the promised seed who will crush the head of the serpent? Where is the seed of blessing in whom every nation, all peoples will be blessed? This seed who comes through Abraham. He's teaching them, you can't do this by the law. Romans 3, 2 short verses. Now we know that whatever the law says, Paul writes, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be closed and all the world become accountable to God, because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. He's telling them, he's telling the entire world that every mouth would be stopped. You can't do this. And if that's all we've got from the law, we're doomed. We're done for. But that's not all it says. Lesson number 2, who is this God? That's the question I've thrown out to you multiple times. Who is this God? He's the one who does it himself. He's the one who sees their need. He's the one who sees their inability. He's the one who could have left them beyond the river to their foreign gods and just let them die and rot there. But he's the God who fights On behalf of his people, Joshua has been saying, I fight for you. I win the battle for you. Who is this God? He is the God who does what they couldn't do himself. But when the fullness of time came, Galatians 4, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Jesus himself comes, and he perfectly obeys. It is finished, he cries out from that cross, because he always obeyed his Father. He kept every bit of the law to the very end, and he fulfills it, all that it was pointing to. So he perfectly obeys, and yet here's the crazy part of it. Not only does he perfectly obey, but he himself, the righteous one, takes the curse of the law. It's interesting. You remember those descriptions from 23 here of the curses that are coming their way? Your sides whipped, thorns in your eyes. Sounds a little like what Jesus went through, right? He's beaten to a pulp. He's whipped mercilessly. Crown of thorns stuck on his head, piercing his brow. Jesus perfectly obeys, and Jesus gets the curse that sinners might be made sons. Sinners might be adopted, that they might be called righteous. God himself came to do all of this and fulfill every bit of it. It's interesting. Shechem comes up in other spots too. But Shechem comes all the way up again in the New Testament. John chapter 4, before Joshua, we preached through the Gospel of John. It's a weird time. Jesus is traveling. He's going back to Galilee, and what does he do? He decides, I'm going to take a shortcut. It's not really a shortcut, but he decides, I'm going to travel through this area called Samaria. If you remember that, that's 10 tribes of Israel who went off and abandoned the Lord and intermarried and false gods and all that stuff. And the Jews hated the Samaritans, and the Samaritans hated the Jews. And here we are in John chapter 4. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria, so he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar. Same place, Shechem. Same spot. How do we know? Near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. This place, Shechem, as it's conquered by all these other different places and eventually comes to part of the Samaritan land, it gets renamed to Sychar. And here's Jesus himself at the very well Jacob built. And his words to this sinful woman. Jesus knows all about it, though she tries to hide it. She says, Jesus, that this man knew every single thing about me. And Jesus says to her at that well, at this spot in Shechem, an hour is coming and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. And the bottom line point of his message is it's all about me. I am he, the Messiah, the one you're waiting for. When she goes there to Messiah, Jesus says, oh yeah, that's me. I'm the way to be right with God. I'm the way to be a true worshiper with him. It's all through me. And the woman comes and Jesus stays for days. This is one of his best ministry spots in all of his ministry. Many more believed because of his word, and they were saying to the woman, it's no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard ourselves and know that this one is indeed the Savior of the world. Same ground, same spot. Jesus says, You don't come to the Father through the old covenant anymore. You come through me and the new covenant and my blood. That's how you get to the Father. That's how you're made right with him. I am here to fulfill all that and accomplish everything and save sinners once and for all. The faithful Jews looking forward to Jesus and his promises. We today looking backward. All we need is Jesus. He's the one who can take us into the promised land. He's the one who will defeat all our enemies, sin, death, Satan. It is finished, he cries. The way to God is clear. Come to him. Come to him. Let's pray. Thank you for your word, Lord. You are Jesus, the truer, the better, the greater Joshua. Help us to find in you our salvation, our righteousness. Write it on our hearts. Give us circumcised hearts and open our eyes and unstuff our ears to see, to find in Jesus Christ our everything. I pray it in your name. Amen.
Let's stand together. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder. Show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me.
Brothers and sisters, as we look back on our lives, as we look back to what Christ has done, let us see there the mighty acts, the saving, miraculous acts of God, of King Jesus, our champion, who has saved us, who will be with us today and tomorrow, and he will defeat all our enemies. Let's cling to him. Let's trust him. You're dismissed.